Story 1. If you can't fix the thinking, then listen to an audiobook with a sleep timer set at a volume just high enough for you to hear it, but not loud enough to wake you if you fall asleep. Story 2. I read something in the New York Times. Pick any word, take the first letter, and start naming as many other words as you can think of that begin with that letter. When you run out, move to the second letter of the word, and so forth. It was developed to help slow our minds down and stop racing thoughts when trying to sleep. I started doing this, and I've had to rely on medication much less in order to fall asleep. Story 3. I started narrating my racing thoughts in a David Attenborough voice. And here, we observe the anxious human overthinking a text from 7 years ago. Story 4. Close your eyes and picture yourself on the bank of a beautiful river at dusk. Whenever a thought races into your mind, say intrusive thought, then place it in the river and watch it float away. Story 5. I experienced this frequently around project deadlines. As a project manager, I have been personally responsible for significant time-sensitive deliverables. First, I stopped drinking caffeine after 12 p.m. That really helped a lot. I would have 2 or 3 coffees in the morning, then switch to herbal or decaffeinated tea. Second, I learned to keep a pencil or pen and a notepad beside my bed. When my mind started racing, I would turn on the night light and jot down my thoughts. This allowed me to compartmentalize the issues and lock them away for later attention, which helped convince my brain that I had addressed the matter as much as possible at that time. In the morning, I would read my notes and execute the ideas they generated, either then or afterward. It's important to use pen and paper, but avoid electronics. Using digital tools meant I might get distracted by other things, wasting another hour of my time. What I discovered after a few years of this practice was a pattern. Everything always seemed worse at 3 a.m. Usually, by the next day, my anxieties were greatly exaggerated, and what I had worried about was often minor in the light of day. Story 6. Talking to myself as if I am a whale helps every time. You must go to sleep. It's enough of an activity to distract the mind from unnecessary thoughts, but it can be boring and might make you sleepy. Story 7. Turn off the screen 20 minutes beforehand. Take 1 melatonin gummy, and you'll be asleep in no time. Story 8. Online therapy truly saved me. My mind used to race at night, and I couldn't sleep well. My therapist taught me some techniques to calm it down. It was life-changing, and you should consider trying it. Story 9. A podcast called Nothing Much Happens. I have listened to a few sleep podcasts over the years, and this was the best one for me. Story 10. Music or noise from the washing machine. Another trick is to focus on one thing. As a storyteller, I concentrate on the story I created in my mind, which makes me feel good or distracted. Story 11. I had a former coworker who said that focusing on his breathing helps him by paying attention to how it feels in the sound. That makes sense since it's essentially a form of meditation. Story 12. I imagine myself walking through the skin of a giant soap bubble. As I walk through, all of the things that worry me and distract me from sleep are washed away and left on the other side. Inside the bubble is a small cottage. I envision every detail of the surrounding forest and exterior, as well as the inside of the house, as I explore. I design the entire space in minute detail, and sometimes it takes me weeks to get a room exactly right. Occasionally, I return and change it entirely. In the end, it feels like a refuge, and I eventually fall asleep, feeling much more relaxed in a safe space of my own creation. Story 13. I have struggled with insomnia since high school. I started reading on an e-reader about 2 years ago. It has helped me focus on the story without dwelling on random, embarrassing thoughts about my past actions. Additionally, reading makes my eyes tired, so I usually cannot read for more than 30 minutes before falling asleep. Story 14. I don't experience this regularly, so my advice may not apply. However, I have found the paced breathing application on the Play Store to be very helpful for calming the mind. I set it to inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, and exhale for 8 seconds. After 10 minutes of this, your body is naturally compelled to relax, which is very beneficial for any kind of anxiety. Story 15. Melatonin, magnesium, and masturbation. You can't have racing thoughts if you're busy engaging in stimulating activities before bed. Story 16. Exercise helped some, but medication took me the rest of the way. I need both for decent sleep. When things get really tough, I try to visualize the racing thoughts as blocks of light and imagine tucking them away into a box. It's a slow process, but it works for me, and I liken it to counting sheep. Story 17. Exercise. When it's really tough, I push myself so hard that when I get home, I'm too physically exhausted to stay awake. Imagination. I realize that what keeps me awake is when my mind starts fixating on real-world problems. If I spend my waking hours in bed daydreaming about impossible scenarios, it helps me avoid the real issues that create these loops. Instead, I immerse myself in fantasy worlds or science fiction stories. Above all else, keep the phone out of reach. Scrolling through social media will keep you awake, as your brain is constantly receiving new information to process. Story 18. For a long time, I had to use Ambien to sleep. Once I realized that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was causing the sleep disturbance, I got Adderall for the day and a low dose of trazodone at night. A technique I used before Ambien that sometimes helped was counting backward from 300 by threes. It gave one track of my mind something to do and calmed some of my thoughts. Story 19. I have a very high-stress job in healthcare. I discovered a long time ago that before bed, I can imagine a fun scenario in my head. I picture myself taking a bike ride across the country with friends or going on a sailing trip to Australia. Something wild and adventurous. I often find myself falling asleep while trying to keep the story going. This technique has worked for me for about 15 years now. Story 20. I put on my headphones and listen to a guided meditation. I already have it queued up, so all I have to do is press the button on my headphones without looking at my phone. Story 21. I listen to the podcast Sleep With Me, and there are others out there as well. It gives my brain something to focus on that won't keep it awake either. Additionally, I consider pharmaceuticals. Story 22. 5 milligrams of cannabis gummy 30 minutes before lying down. Note that most of these come as 10 milligram gummies. Just cut them in half. Story 23. A couple of things for me. I listen to the podcast called Get Sleepy. Whenever Thomas narrates, his deep, soothing British accent helps lull me to sleep. They feature intentionally boring stories, and he sometimes includes breathing or relaxation exercises at the beginning. Choose a number in the 300s and start counting backward by threes, such as 362, 359, 356, and so on. It should be boring enough to help you fall asleep. Select a letter and mentally name words that start with that letter until you run out, then move to the next letter. Story 24. I tried everything and ended up taking propranolol, duloxetine, hydroxyzine, and medical marijuana to help me sleep for 6 hours. I was only getting 1 to 2 hours before. I would suggest trying everything you can before considering medications. I dislike relying on all of these just to sleep. Good luck. Story 25. I know it seems silly, but I count. I focus very hard on counting. If I am still having intrusive thoughts in the background, I try to visualize a giant on a cliff by the ocean throwing sheep into the water, and the sheep swim back to be thrown again or get eaten by a shark. If I lose my count, I start over. On good nights, I am asleep by 3 a.m. On bad nights, I have gotten up to 1 a.m. Story 26. Exercise and allow yourself 30 minutes for a cool down before bed. Read something you don't find engaging or listen to an audiobook with a calming narrator that you can enjoy with your eyes closed. If you prefer supplements, consider valerian root and vitamin E tablets before bed, as they can help calm your body. I suggest avoiding melatonin, as prolonged use can reduce your natural hormone production. Story 27. A small amount of trazodone and not trying to sleep helps. I typically focus on how comfortable and warm I am, closing my eyes and thinking, don't force it. You will fall asleep at the right time. On nights when these methods don't work and my mind is racing, I use hydroxyzine, an antihistamine with anti-anxiety effects. It works like a charm. After that, I accept that some nights won't be as good as others, and I can always get back on track over the next few nights. Story 28. A simple meditation I condition myself to practice whenever this occurs is to internally tell myself to clear my mind of any thoughts and think of nothing. I then try to focus on maintaining that state until I fall asleep, typically within a few minutes. Story 29. I take 2 pills and play a Netflix documentary, whichever one it may be, then turn to the other side so the light from the screen doesn't hinder my falling asleep. Story 30. I know it sounds silly, but before bed, I cast YouTube to my TV and find a dark screen video with healing frequencies, different hertz. There are meditations as well. Story 31. I figured it out. During graduate school, when my mind was working overtime on tough projects, I experienced insomnia. I learned not to fight it. I would simply get out of bed and quietly distract myself, usually by reading, for about 90 minutes. That is one sleep cycle. Importantly, I avoided bright lights and loud sounds that would wake me up, as well as any food that could lead to more insomnia later. Then, about 90 minutes in, as soon as I felt tired, I would slip into my waiting bed, and voila! Sometimes I wake up around 1:30 a.m. and just relax until 3 a.m. No worries. Story 32. Podcasts have an appeal that fascinates me, even if I'm not deeply invested. There's something about hearing people discuss topics I'm vaguely interested in that helps me fall asleep more easily than other activities. I enjoy playing tabletop role-playing games, but I'm less engaged when listening to others play them. However, before bed, they captivate me just enough to hold my interest without requiring my full attention, allowing me to drift off to sleep comfortably. Story 33. Benjamin Franklin had a second bed in a separate bedroom. When he couldn't sleep, he simply went to the other bed and fell asleep. We shouldn't judge people. Perhaps the original poster is a low-income individual who cannot afford multiple bedrooms for each person in the home. Story 34. I listen to Futurama while falling asleep. It's basically just background chatter that I am familiar enough with that it doesn't actually take up brain power. There's even an online community for it. Story 35. Pick any word and then think of all the words that start with that letter. It stops the racing thoughts, and I seem to fall asleep after about 8 words. Story 36. Melatonin before bed. I don't wait and try to calm down on my own because I know it won't work. I turn on a comfort show, either watch a little bit then turn it off and try again to go to sleep, or just lie there listening to it with my eyes closed. If it's something I've seen many times, usually I can fall asleep with it playing. Story 37. The combination of Benadryl and melatonin is helpful. Having a weighted blanket oddly assists me, but only on my feet. If my feet are cold, I can't sleep, but I dislike wearing socks. My therapist suggested focusing on physical sensations when trying to sleep. The weight of the blankets, your body temperature, the feel of the fabrics, your comfort level, and the breeze from a fan on your face. It can also be beneficial to use calming apps on your phone. Story 38. I keep my Kindle by my bed, and when I wake up at 3 a.m., I read for an hour or two before I fall asleep again. It decreases the volume of my internal monologue long enough for me to get back to sleep. Story 39. Listening to Warhammer 40,000 lore videos on YouTube. I'm not even a Warhammer fan, but it works like a charm. Story 40. I focus on how comfortable I will be in bed in the morning when I want to sleep, and that usually helps. Story 41. I keep paper and a pen on my nightstand. When this happens, I sit up and write down the thoughts I'm having, telling myself that I'm recording them now so I can deal with them in the morning. It has a reasonably good success rate. Story 42. Imagining story scenes I had planned to write repeatedly has become challenging. The problem is that I have already written down most of the story, making it difficult to envision future scenes. Story 43. I usually wait until I am so tired and bored that I can barely keep my eyes open. Then I walk over to my bed and fall asleep quickly. I used to try to go to sleep at set times like a reasonable person, but it just doesn't work for me. I won't sleep unless I am seriously tired, so I end up lying awake in bed for hours. Story 44. Watching a TV show that you've already seen, preferably one with a lot of dialogue. Turn the volume down low just enough so you can make out most of what they are saying and close your eyes. For me, giving my brain just enough stimulus to focus on rather than my thoughts helps a lot. Story 45. I enjoy history, so I watch a person who discusses historical events in a soft-spoken voice for 9 hours. I typically only last about 15 minutes before I fall asleep. Story 46. I have been using melatonin sublingual spray for a bit over 2 weeks, and it has been a game changer. It has worked like a dream every time. I take the spray, wait a while, and then experience massive sleepiness. I get into bed with rain sounds, and maybe 30 seconds later, it's the next morning. They recommend 2 sprays, but I found that 3 works best for me, as I have a higher body mass. Setting up my computer to reduce blue light after dark also helped a bit when I did it. I drink coffee only once in the morning to wake up. Stay hydrated by drinking half a liter of water when the sun goes down. Being dehydrated makes it harder to fall asleep, and you don't sleep as well. For racing thoughts, I found a noise/rain app on my phone with a 30-minute timer works well as a distraction. Although it is annoying that an ad plays every time I set it up. Exercise makes a significant difference whether you are active or not, but of course, do not exercise right before sleep. A long time ago, I used to use cannabis for sleep. It worked very well, but it reduced my ability to code efficiently and caused me to stop having dreams, which is a deal breaker for me. Overall, all of this helped, but the game changer has really been the melatonin. Story 47. Brown noise is available on YouTube in multi-hour videos featuring a black screen. These videos include white noise, brown noise, which is deeper and softer than white noise, and other background sounds. Story 48. Honestly, white noise or similar droning sound soothes my brain and helps me stay calm to fall asleep. Story 49. Pick a letter. Count to 8. Find a word that starts with the letter. Repeat this process until you fall asleep. Story 50. Lorazepam is amazing. I received a prescription from my previous doctor for insomnia due to racing thoughts. Just having it next to my bed is really comforting, knowing that if it gets bad, I can take a pill and get a good night's sleep. I am aware that it is highly addictive, so I am extremely careful not to take it more than once a week on average. My current doctor clearly wants to get me off it, but I have shown her my history, which indicates that I have never filled my prescription more than twice a year, and she backs off. Story 51. I feel I have the answer, and it is frustrating. The way I see it, your life is like a song, and the melody needs to be resolved. If you need to be asleep by 9 p.m. and you watch videos until 10 p.m., your brain will begin resolving the day's actions, thoughts, and feelings at 10 p.m., maybe until 11 p.m. However, if you forego technology and everything else and get in bed by 8:30 p.m. to try to sleep, the usual tossing and turning and thinking will happen sooner, and you'll achieve more rest as long as you are actually tired and not on a bad schedule, which needs to be addressed differently. Sadly, I have found the answer to be to try to sleep early, which is not ideal but effective. Although I did not get to game or hang out, I got plenty of sleep and am not tired. This may not be everyone's issue, but I believe it applies to many. I hope this helps. I think most people who do not have trouble sleeping have more opportunities throughout the day to resolve their thoughts as they go. In contrast, those with jobs and families often dedicate their mental energy to others' issues and then pursue entertainment, which is simply more of other people's thoughts. This prevents them from resolving their own until bedtime. There are certainly exceptions, and the physical exhaustion from solving everyone else's problems might make you tired enough to fall asleep. Music can help. I believe instrumental music is superior as it allows you to hear your own thoughts. However, I didn't want to mention this since some people benefit from watching TV while others do not, and the same can be said for music. Story 52. The best thing for me was to get up and start doing something. Your body and mind will start shutting down when they are ready. I have fallen asleep within about 5 minutes, leaned over the kitchen sink while attempting to do dishes. Story 53. I use podcasts, but I have also used cognitive shuffling, which works when podcasts do not. I developed my own technique to create a story and then try to visualize it like a movie in my head. I repeat the same story night after night, moving the plot a bit farther each day. This approach has worked very well. Story 54. I had racing thoughts before bed for many years. Turns out I have bipolar disorder. Medication can help manage racing thoughts. Story 55. Let's say you have 100 thoughts a minute. You can't control everyone, but you can control at least 1 out of every 100. So make sure that at least 1 out of every 100 thoughts is a mindful choice, usually a happy thought. Do this for a full day. The next day, aim for 2 out of every 100 thoughts to be purposely controlled by you, again aiming for a happy one. Do this all day. Day 3 gets interesting. 2 out of every 100 thoughts should be mindfully constructed by you and ensure they are happy. However, now 1 out of every 100 should be a sad thought. Throughout the day, continue switching between those 2 happy thoughts and the 1 sad thought. Do this all day. On day 4, you should have a firm grasp on how to do this. Each day, increase the number of times you control your thoughts, but switch from mostly happy to sad. You are now controlling your thoughts, emotions, and many other things you didn't know you wanted control over. This is the point where I gained control over all my addictions. Turns out I was very addicted to diet soda. Story 56. CBD, mindfulness, and lavender oil are all beneficial. I lay down in my dark room, close my eyes, and let my mind wander, eventually drifting off to sleep. Story 57. The best thing that works for me is to set my mind to thinking about something that has no real impact. I enjoy contemplating absurd or impossible hypothetical situations and planning out every detail or allowing myself to overthink. It's fun to base them on movies or television, such as what would you do if you had the death note? How would you escape? What is the perfect crime? What is the best superpower to have? And what would you do during the purge? These are just random situations that I can immerse myself in until I pass out, and they don't stress me out when thinking about real-life issues. Story 58. Weed was a short-term solution. Learning to manage my anxiety through therapy was a long-term solution. Story 59. I started taking Lexapro. It turns out my difficulty sleeping due to racing thoughts was part of a broader anxiety disorder. Story 60. Write down everything you are worried about. Next to each concern, write the worst-case scenario. Then, next to that, write what you can do to mitigate it. Story 61. A spoonful of peanut butter and 1 milligram of melatonin about 30 minutes before bed helps me relax. Then I read for at least 10 minutes. Within 5 minutes of putting my book down, I fall asleep. Story 62. I listen to Reddit threads with a text-to-speech application. Unfortunately, my favorite application for that is no longer supported by iOS. The one I use now, called Web Out Loud, has pop-up ads that can be annoying. If anyone has found a good, simple application for reading web pages, please let me know. Story 63. I have found a method with a near 100% success rate, and it honestly feels like I have unlocked a cheat code for falling asleep. Here is what you do. 1. Lie in a comfortable position. Take deep breaths. Slowly count backward from 100 to 1. It is helpful to count on an outward breath, and it is important that you do not try to count in seconds. You can leave a few beats between numbers. I find that it gives your brain just enough to focus on so you cannot think of other things, but not enough that you cannot fall into sleep. I very rarely make it past the 60s. Story 64. I imagine a massive plaid flannel blanket covering the entire ocean, and then I try running as far as I can onto it from the beach while dodging the puddles that seep through and form on the surface. Story 65. I listen to music or anything gentle, like an informative video, while focusing with my eyes closed. I need to play it quietly. It's like giving my brain a toy, similar to a spoiled toddler, to keep it distracted enough so I can fall asleep. Story 66. I taught my dog to provide deep pressure therapy whenever I felt restless, and she even helped with my nightmares. Years later, I can sleep normally without assistance. Story 67. I have no idea where I got this idea from, but it can be quite useful. Just think of unrelated words. Start with something like apple, then wait for a new word to form, maybe culottes, and wait again for another. I prefer to keep the pace relaxed. There's no competition involved. Like with meditation, if your thoughts start racing, it's perfectly fine. This happens all the time. Just gently pick up your train of thought, put it back on track, and return to free associating. I've been doing this for about 6 to 8 months, and it has become a positive habit. It is the opposite of pattern forming, racing thoughts, complicated ideas, and worry. If it helps or embarrasses me, I also try to smile while I'm doing it. Story 68. Rock yourself side to side slowly when trying to fall asleep. A weighted blanket can also make a significant difference. Story 69. ASMR videos of people being tickled and having their hair played with are the only thing that helps me sleep every time. Story 70. Meditation involves using controlled breathing techniques alongside background noise, like brown or white noise. Previously, I discovered that mildly entertaining audiobooks were also beneficial. They needed to be engaging enough to hold my attention without preventing me from falling asleep. If they were too captivating, I would remain awake, and if they were too dull, I struggled to listen. Both methods effectively helped calm my racing thoughts. Story 71. I pick a number in the hundreds and count backwards by threes. I have to concentrate enough that it distracts me from other things. I usually do not make it past about 60 numbers. I typically start in the 300s somewhere. Story 72. An app called iSleep Easy offers various guided sleep meditations that you can organize into a playlist of your choice. I have experienced severe insomnia at different times in my life, and this app works when nothing else does. Most of the time, I fall asleep before I finish the entire playlist. On particularly bad nights, I often fall asleep during the second loop of the playlist. Story 73. Sleeping aid. Nothing else works. I even overthink the noise machine. I need to be completely relaxed. Story 74. I started focusing my attention on listening to the fan in my room each night. My mind would wander from the fan, but I would stubbornly return my focus to it. I would do this several times and then suddenly wake up the next day. I have been doing it ever since. Story 75. Here is my genuine sleep cocktail. 2 melatonin gummies. 2 allergy medications of your choice. 2 magnesium glycinate. If I am really having a bad day, I use hits from my gardening pen. I haven't had dreams or nightmares since the election. Story 76. I watch reruns of shows I have seen enough times that they are not engaging enough to keep me awake, but just engaging enough to distract my mind from constant thoughts. Story 77. Not eating 4 hours before sleeping. Walking 10,000 steps or even walking before sleeping. Shower, have intimate relations, or engage in self-pleasure. Story 78. I take prescribed medications to sleep that are technically for anxiety. The racing thoughts made something click with my doctor, but they don't always help with the sleepiness portion of being in bed. So I read on my Kindle for a while and then listened to the Seth and Josh Meyers podcast while resting my eyes. The interviews are interesting enough if I end up having an insomniac night, but inconsequential if I fall asleep. Additionally, melatonin never worked for me. It felt like my mind and body were always fighting against it. Story 79. I listen to crime podcasts and focus my attention on the details of the case. A few minutes in, I usually fall asleep. Story 80. I listen to a podcast or audiobook on a timer set for 15 minutes, but realistically, I am asleep within the first 5 minutes. I highly recommend anything by Aaron Mahnke. His voice is very soothing. However, his podcasts may be too scary for some, so they might not be for everyone. Story 81. I play an audiobook and set a timer for 15 minutes. I rarely have to extend the timer, and if I miss part of the book, it's only 15 minutes. It's easy to skip back. Story 82. 1. Put the phone in another room when it is time for bed. Make a list of things you are grateful for in your mind. Embrace the journey of racing thoughts. Story 83. Something I tried last night was setting up a bunch of flickering fake candles in my room and using only those along with a book light for a while. I slept better than I have in a long time. Another tip is to listen to a cozy audiobook while doing Sudoku until I'm so tired I want to fall asleep. The low light and slow activity help calm my mind. Story 84. Trazodone is a much safer alternative to the addictive sleep aids often used in the United States. It is important to consult a doctor to ensure it is the right option for you. Story 85. I started a meditation routine for chronic pain, and it stopped my mind from racing on the second night. Usually, I need to take something to sleep, or it can take hours to doze off. It is strange because I have tried many meditations for sleep without seeing any results. Story 86. Sleep podcasts. For a while, I listened to Sleep With Me, and lately, I enjoy Nothing Much Happens. Story 87. I typically watch a movie that I know very well. More often than not, I fall asleep before the opening scene is complete. Story 88. I have struggled with insomnia for over 20 years. I am on trazodone to help me sleep, but it is not a strong sleep aid. It just helps. I have found guided meditation to be really helpful, as it allows me to focus my thoughts on a single thing, like a pond with ripples or a creek with bubbles. It is gentle and calming. Meditation is great for falling asleep, but staying asleep is another issue. Story 89. Sounds pretty basic, but it fills the space. I use a white noise machine, or sometimes a podcast or audiobook in a language I don't speak or understand. It helps fill the noise in my head quite well. If that fails, I try to focus on something boring. The whole concept of counting sheep isn't entirely baseless. It serves as a small exercise in meditation. Usually, I try to recount my day in reverse, paying attention to as much detail as possible. This helps occupy my mind without thinking about something that keeps me active or tense. Since I already struggle with racing thoughts, I tend to deviate, which is fine. Just bring your focus back as soon as you notice and try to concentrate on your day in reverse. Story 90. I love going to the gym, so I usually reflect on what I accomplished today and plan for tomorrow. In that process, I often lose track of time and end up sleeping without realizing it. Essentially, I focus on thoughts that bring me joy. Story 91. Television shows that I have seen numerous times, such as Futurama, are interesting enough to shut off my brain. However, since I have watched them so often, they are not stimulating enough to keep me awake. I set the sleep timer on the television for 30 minutes but rarely last even 5 minutes before I fall asleep. Story 92. Reading. My brain would not shut off until I tried reading. The trick is that when you are reading in bed and you feel a wave of fatigue hit, close the book and put it down. Don't try to finish the chapter, the page, or the paragraph. If you resist that fatigue, it will pass. That worked for me, and I got to enjoy reading again. Story 93. Exercise. Taking daily allergy medication using a white noise machine, an ADHD diagnosis and medication. Stimulants surprisingly help me sleep a bit, and having a partner with a healthy sleep schedule. Story 94. Reduce caffeine intake to 1 cup a day before 8 a.m. and increase exercise. Additionally, hot and cold exposure, such as saunas, hot tubs, ice baths, and cold showers, is beneficial. Finally, taking a small amount of liquid magnesium before bed helps me sleep for 7 to 8 hours. Story 95. I had to convince myself that sleep is overrated. I have gotten 8 hours of sleep and felt drained the entire day, while sometimes I feel perfectly fine after 4 hours of sleep. Story 96. Taking low-dose CBD and THC gummies and learning to interrupt thoughts has become a habit for me. I remind myself, I don't need to think about this right now. I also listen to podcasts or watch ASMR artists. One important aspect is taking essential vitamins daily, including vitamin D3, K2, and collagen in the morning. Additionally, I take 500 milligrams of magnesium and low-dose zinc 2 hours before bed. This routine helps me sleep beautifully. Story 97. Journaling. Turn off the computer at least an hour before bedtime and read a preferably paper book. Avoid social media during this period. No caffeine after noon. Take melatonin about an hour before bedtime. Lately, it has been all of the above plus Irish whiskey or scotch. Story 98. Vigorous exercise early in the morning can lead to physical exhaustion, making it difficult for the mind to think clearly. Story 99. I would force myself to focus on recounting something at a slow pace, similar to counting sheep. For me, it was broadcasting a baseball game. I would be the announcer, calling the action and describing the pitcher on the mound, the batter in the box, and the weather. I would concentrate on pitches, plays, scores, and innings. I often fell asleep in the third inning. It took practice to maintain focus and avoid drifting away. Another technique I used was yoga breathing, specifically be breath, where I would concentrate on the sound and try to visualize it. Story 100. Fall asleep listening to an interesting but somewhat difficult to follow podcast, such as The Economist or Freakonomics, either with earbuds or a pillow speaker. Set a timer for 10 to 15 minutes. This keeps your mind occupied with something else but allows you to drift off. Story 101. I concentrate on my breathing. I think to myself on each inhale, in, and on each exhale, out. If my mind starts to wander, I acknowledge the thoughts and return to my inhales and exhales. This helps calm my restless mind. Story 102. I have to remind myself to close the tabs. I compare it to having too many tabs open in Chrome. I tell myself it is time to shut the system down and go into rest mode. Story 103. Ambient music is something I enjoy along with melatonin supplements. Story 104. Lexapro and more exercise during the day, even just getting my steps in, have been beneficial. But mostly it's the Lexapro. Story 105. My option is straightforward. Don't get in bed until you are truly ready to sleep. Many people lie down early to relax, play on their phones, or read until they feel tired. This approach doesn't work for me. If I'm not ready to sleep, I end up doing other things. By following this method, I find that when I do go to bed, I fall asleep within 30 to 45 minutes at most. Story 106. Read interesting but dull books. Michael Lewis books are my preferred choice. I read them on paper or a Kindle, not on a bright screen. Story 107. I listen to a show I know well or an audiobook I have heard before. Something with dialogue that I don't have to pay attention to. The familiarity allows my mind to relax, and the conversation drowns out the intrusive thoughts. Story 108. One thing I do when I wake up because of racing thoughts is a strange exercise where I come up with adjectives for something using the alphabet. For example, a cow. I will lay there and say, "A cow is," and try to think of an adjective that starts with the letter A, then B, and so on. My brain gets pretty tired by the letter K, and I fall asleep. It has helped me a lot. I have never made it to Z. Story 109. Listening to a podcast on a timer seems to work well for me when falling asleep. I also find that focusing my thoughts on my happy place, like camping or imagining I am playing in Major League Baseball, helps. If I concentrate long enough, I tend to fall back asleep in a better mood, with my mind not racing. Story 110. I play the alphabet game. I pick a simple category such as fruit or place names. Then, I go through the alphabet and think of something in that category that begins with each letter. If I reach the end, I choose another category. I rarely get through this exercise twice before I fall asleep. The only challenge is if I can't think of anything for a letter. The rule is to move on or choose something at least vaguely related. I avoid picking up my phone to search for answers, as it can lead to distractions and staying up until sunrise. Story 111. I decided to write a book to get some of the stories out of my head. Come nighttime, I look forward to lying there and thinking it all through so that the next day I know what to put on the page. If I am going to stay awake at night thinking, I am putting it to good use. More often than not, I end up falling asleep, and my thoughts carry into dreams, which allows me to be even more subconsciously aware of my story. Story 112. Edibles and gummies specific for sleep. I eat one at 6 p.m., and by 8 p.m., I'm fighting the Sandman and losing. Story 113. For me, it was discovering that my racing thoughts and ruminations were actually flashbacks. I started using Pete Walker's flashback management techniques from his book, Complex Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. From surviving to thriving. It helps. Story 114. Think to yourself, what will my next thought be? Start with a clean slate. When thoughts rush back in, repeat the process. Story 115. You need to find ways to distract yourself. While it's often recommended to turn off your screen, during the pandemic, I found watching animated shows helpful. Using night mode makes it easier on the eyes. By the end of an episode, I can usually place my phone on the nightstand and fall asleep. Establishing a routine can be very beneficial. Over time, you can train yourself to fall asleep by creating a consistent habit. Story 116. Audiobooks or a comfort show I've seen before, with one earbud facing up and the other resting on the pillow. I use a shutdown app that closes my active apps on my phone in about 30 to 40 minutes. It works every time. Nearly every night, I manage to take out the earbud after I've fallen asleep without it waking me. Story 117. Thinking of random numbers continuously. 9, 2, 7, 7, 8, 4, 9, 1, 0, 0, 5, 5, 4, 2, 6. A countdown was engaging, but recently, simply thinking of the next random number has worked for me. Story 118. I started to create dreams in my mind as something to focus on, like Optimus Prime fighting Megatron in New York City or other random scenarios that have nothing to do with reality. It gives me something to concentrate on and relax instead of worrying. I guess you could say I prepare for my dreams. Story 119. Promethazine is a drowsy antihistamine. I couldn't think clearly. It was lovely. Alternatively, any podcast I am not even slightly interested in plays quietly in the room. Story 120. As a fellow insomniac with a constantly busy autistic brain and a restless body, I listen to sleep stories. I highly recommend Dozing Dragon or, for more guided visualizations, Jason Stevenson. I play them just loud enough to drown out my thoughts. Having another voice helps me relax and sleep. While listening, I also do body part stretches. Curl your toes for 5 to 10 seconds, then unclench. Tense your calves for 5 to 10 seconds, then unclench. On nights when it feels like sleep will take forever, I focus on one limb at a time instead of both. Stretching from the bottom up with different muscle groups surprisingly helps my body relax. Story 121. A good psychiatrist prescribed the right combination of medications that stop this, along with a good therapist to help unpack those thoughts. Story 122. I have dealt with this my entire life. Racing thoughts and songs getting stuck in my head. Then came the tinnitus. I listen to Spotify's Jazz for Sleep playlist every night now. I sleep well and don't wake up to Blink 182's Josie blaring in my head. Story 123. I just say sleep with every breath. It rattles my brain and disrupts my thoughts. Sooner or later, I drift off to sleep. My wife hates it but understands. Story 124. Relax your face, neck, and shoulders. I use a peanut or a foam roller on some nights. Breathe out longer than you breathe in. Story 125. Nothing. I am still working on it. Caffeine does not help. I can't drink it. Even at 5 a.m., I woke up, drank caffeine, and worked out. I feel tired all day and am still awake at 11 p.m. My brain won't shut off. No screens either. I've tried melatonin, magnesium, and slow breathing. It's just brutal for my brain. The only thing I have ever had luck with is maintaining a schedule that works for me. So I'm not panicking when I try to fall asleep. But even then, Story 126. Prescription sleep aid that actually helps with falling asleep and not just sleeping well. Lately, I have been using Unisom. It's not as effective as prescription options, but seems to be acceptable. Story 127. Listening to podcasts or audiobooks helps me fall asleep. It gives my brain something to do other than thinking of the most embarrassing things I have ever done or coming up with great comebacks for insults that happened years ago. Story 128. Melatonin and autonomous sensory meridian response. I don't experience the tingles associated with autonomous sensory meridian response, but listening to someone describe giving me a spa treatment usually distracts my brain from thinking about other things. Story 129. Valium effectively addresses this problem, but be cautious as it can be habit-forming. I only experience this issue a few times a year, so it is the right solution for me. Listening to an audiobook also helps. Story 130. Google what the Army teaches its students about relaxation techniques. If it works for them, it will work for us. Story 131. When I was a child, I would imagine the movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure in my mind. The plot and sequence of events were so lengthy that I would often fall asleep by the end. Story 132. I deal with this daily, mostly work-related. I have to create a fictional story. I need to escape from my daily life and dream of traveling to Hawaii and scuba diving, imagining that I have unlimited funds and can do whatever I want. Essentially, I need to fantasize about a dream life where nothing in my current reality interferes. I must consciously avoid letting real-life thoughts intrude and focus on the fantasy. Story 133. Until a few months ago, I used to lie awake for 1 to 2 hours every night before I finally fell asleep. Now it's usually a maximum of 20 minutes. I also experience racing thoughts, an endless stream of ideas, worries, and dreams, most of which are positive. Here are the changes I made in my life. Diet and weight loss. I eat more than before, but healthier foods. I consume at least 2 pieces of fruit and about 150 to 200 grams of vegetables, as well as enough protein, approximately 1 to 1.2 times your body weight. For example, if you weigh 100 kilograms, that is 100 to 120 grams of protein. This isn't just about losing weight. A proper diet impacts all body systems, including the brain. Going to the gym. I spend a minimum of 40 minutes and a maximum of 1 hour and 15 minutes a couple of times a week. Spending more time in the gym can be counterproductive. Alternatively, I go for walks, usually lasting 1 hour and 15 minutes. I keep my phone out of the bedroom. I believe going for walks is probably the best option because it helps clear my head. I process most of the racing thoughts and imaginary discussions during these walks so I don't have to deal with them at night. Some substances, such as cannabis and melatonin gummies, might help you fall asleep quicker, but they can reduce sleep quality. Story 134. Look up Dan Jones' sleep stories for adults on YouTube. He has a very interesting cadence when narrating his stories. They are meant to lull you into sleep, and you can make the screen black so there is no light coming from your device. Additionally, you can have back-to-back stories playing. Story 135. I have noticed that when I use a noise generator app on my phone, specifically for rain on a car roof, my brain tries to stay busy by following the sound of the rain pattern hitting the roof in my head. However, since the raindrops are truly random, my brain cannot focus on following the pattern. As a result, I end up zoning out and falling asleep. Story 136. I often ask myself, what will be my next thought? And then my mind goes blank. This trick of self-reflection works wonders, at least for me. Story 137. Since I started working 9 to 5 and doing some side hustles, I don't really have racing thoughts. At least I fall asleep very quickly. Story 138. This is unusual and maybe embarrassing, but in the last 2 weeks, I have started to experience vivid dreams. I lay down and daydreamed about an apocalypse with my eyes shut. Anyway, I woke up around 4 a.m. feeling very happy. Story 139. I leave the television on sleep timer for a show I have seen many times and am not really interested in, as I already know what happens. Friends. Keeps me from thinking but doesn't engage me enough to keep me awake. I am rarely still awake when the sleep timer turns the television off. Story 140. Making myself so tired that my brain doesn't have enough energy to complain. I don't recommend it, though, because it's hard on your body. Story 141. I want to be upfront and say that I take medication. I have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and take prazosin, trazodone, and hydroxyzine at bedtime. They work well, and the trazodone helps me fall asleep before I can ruminate. I also have a calming wind-down routine at bedtime and sometimes do a brain dump before sleep, where I list everything I'm stressing about and ideas for how those problems can be solved. It's easier to sleep once you've given your racing thoughts a concrete time to work through them and then leave them behind. Story 142. I want to be upfront and discuss my medication. I have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and take prazosin, trazodone, and hydroxyzine at bedtime. They work really well, and trazodone helps me fall asleep before I can ruminate. I also have a calming wind-down routine at bedtime and sometimes do a brain dump before bed, where I write down everything I'm stressing about and ideas for how those problems can be solved. It's easier to sleep once you've given your racing thoughts a concrete time to process and then let them go. Story 143. The solution I found was to use the word imagination. It needs to be 5 or more letter words. For example, gorge. Then you imagine assigning something for each letter, and after you have imagined it, move on to the next letter. I usually choose animals. G. Giraffe. I imagine how tall the giraffe is and the spots. O. Ocelot. Rat. G. Goat. The elephant. Usually by the third letter, I'm out of ideas. If not, you can move on to a different word. Could be an object, a person, or a fruit. I write the letters with my finger on the bed to help maintain focus. Story 144. I use sleep and relaxation meditation videos. The ones identified as yoga nidra or body scans usually do the trick for me. I use them every night, even when I go to bed tired. Takes a little trial and error to find the ones I like. When that doesn't work, I take half of a sleep aid, but those have side effects. Feeling groggy in the morning and an observable increase in the frequency of migraines for me. Your experience may vary. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.